Hey y'all, it's Troy here, and today we are going to be trying something just a bit different. I'm going full YouTuber, no shame, and doing a fucking tier list. Let's go! Let's go! So I did a review on Total War Pharaoh, and the game was a bit lackluster. But it did give me an itch to go back and play some of the better Total War games. So I thought, hey, let's do a tier list. I've been spending the last few weeks going back and playing some of the older and the more recent released titles. It's really given me an appreciation for what CA and Total War have done. And CA, if you're watching this, I know you're under fire right now, but I just want you to know that you have created some truly fantastic experiences. So let's go ahead and take a look back on those and remember what made them great or not so great. And there are a few things I want to go over before diving into my rankings here. First and foremost, I am very much just your casual Total War game enjoyer. Now, don't get me wrong. I have played a lot of Total War. It's one of the few series that really keeps pulling me back. But there are other YouTubers and tier lists out there that are much more hardcore, that have played these games much more than I have. But I just love Total War and strategy games and talking about video games in general. And of course, this is just that, a normal casual gamer's opinion. I may have some hot takes or maybe not, I don't know, you be the judge, but let's all be civil. So with that, don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as let me know down in the comments what you think. My tier list F tier trash, or do you agree with all my fantastic points? Join me, friends, and let's discuss what we all love, video games. I enjoy engaging with y'all. So next, let's talk the tier list and ranking criteria. Now, I'll mostly be going off my personal enjoyment and how worth it I think the game is to just sink hours into. But I'll also be thinking about how the game stood the test of time, how good it was on launch, and its legacy to the series as a whole, such as introducing certain mechanics. I'll just be taking into consideration a bit of everything, but mostly my own personal enjoyment. So what do the different tiers mean? Starting with S tier being near perfect or will be considered a classic. A tier being still excellent, but perhaps has a little road bump here. I just realized in those first two that B was actually below C. But anyways, with B tier being still great, but worth your time, but has maybe one or two major flaws to point out. C tier being mostly good, but maybe only really worth playing if you are into the setting, as there are some glaring issues. D tier, we're getting into the not so good and only really worth it if the setting is just really your jam. And F tier being a complete failure of a game. Should never play it. And of course, there's unplayed, which brings me to the final point before getting started. There are a few games that I actually haven't played, and probably never will, but I don't think they are relevant to the tier list anyways, so let's start off with those. Alright, so these are Shogun 1, Medieval 1, Thrones of Britannia, and surprisingly, Warhammer 1. Now, before you bring out your pitchforks and I get nailed to the cross here, I just want to say that I respect Shogun 1 and Medieval 1 for what they are. But we all know that Total War as we truly know it began with Rome Total War. If we were ranking all life on Earth, we wouldn't rank the primordial ooze that life was created from, would we? But we respect the primordial ooze for what it had done, as I respect the original Shogun and Medieval. And the same sort of applies for Warhammer 1, which came out in 2016, and Warhammer 2 came out in 2017. Its life cycle and relevance was just simply too short. It only really proved as a stepping stone for Warhammer 2. And well, Thrones of Britannia, I honestly just have no desire to play that game. I've heard it's bad, I've heard it's not so bad. In the end, it's really irrelevant to Total War as a whole, so let's just go ahead and let that one fall into obscurity. And so now we will go ahead and hop into all the Total Wars that I have played. And I want to go ahead and do this chronologically to kind of keep you on your toes, as well as to kind of move through the Total War timeline to see how CA has done better or worse over the years. And we'll go ahead and try and rank these within the tier list themselves, with the best being on the far left. But all right, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes. What the hell is even that? All right, starting with Rome Total War, the game that started it all. For me, a Rome Total War is a solid A tier. My first exposure to Total War was with Medieval 2, but shortly after playing that, I actually went back and played Rome and I loved it. I respect the shit out of this game. And for 2004, this game was a technical marvel. I mean, just looking at the battles in Medieval 1, which came out in 2002, against Rome, you can see why Rome became such a success. It was also the first game to make army movement around the campaign map fluid rather than region locked. So with these huge improvements over its predecessors, Rome was just the first game in the series that was really a big success and really created the Total War following that we have today. You know, sure, booting up now, Rome is definitely dated and hasn't aged the best, but it's undeniable the legacy that Rome has had not only on Total War, but as gaming as a whole. All roads lead to Rome, as it sits very solidly in A tier. Now into Medieval 2. This game is an absolute banger. If Rome Total War started it, Medieval 2 perfected it. Instant S tier. Now yes, sure, it didn't really introduce anything groundbreaking into the Total War formula, but it didn't need to at the time. It just took everything that made Rome successful and just cranked that shit up a few notches. The setting for me is my favorite historically. Rome is cool, but who doesn't love going on fucking jihads or crusades across the entire map just to slap around some infidels? And there are other big historical events that you need to weather, like the Black Plague, Mongol invasions, and discovering the New World. Also, the soundtrack to this one just slaps. It's still stuck into my head this day. And you got yourself a masterpiece. The craziest thing is that it still holds up well to this very day. Yes, sure, the graphics may be a tad dated, but it is surprisingly pretty. Now, there's a reason why it's the 4th most played Total War game on Steam charts. Medieval 2 earned its spot in its very, very high castle, sitting up on S tier. Yes, and these stupid jokes are gonna keep coming. Next is Empire. Empire. For me, Empire is a solid C tier. I feel like this one might get me in some hot water because most people seem to either love or hate Empire. It's mostly good, but only really worth playing if the time period really interests you, due to there just being better options. This kind of goes without saying, but I'm not considering mods at all. This is straight vanilla. Because I've heard there are some really good mods out there for Empire, but that's not really fair to the tier list. Anyways, I do respect what CA tried to do here, making a big jump into the 18th century, and I do enjoy this period personally. This game had a lot of firsts for the series, including, decentralized provinces, a true resource economy, different forms of government, gunpowder warfare, and of course the ever elusive naval battles. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. This game was almost a bit too ambitious and changed a lot of their winning formula too quickly and ultimately didn't quite fit together right. Empire also had some really bad performance issues on launch and was just riddled with bugs. It really seems like CA might have bit off a little bit more than they could chew here. However, the naval battles did slap, so maybe that's where all their effort was going. But again, I respect what CA was trying to do, and it was innovative, but it just lands in C tier at the end of the day. Now Napoleon Total War.
Can you bring me my chapstick?
No, Napoleon.
But my lips hurt real bad.
For me, Napoleon sits nicely right above Empire in the B tier. It's very similar to Empire, right? It's taking place just a bit after in the Napoleonic Wars. And Napoleon Total War really seemed like to take what was in Empire and just give it that polish that it needed. The land battles were better, the campaign was better, the graphics and performance were way better. The only thing is that it shrunk its scope to just Europe, but I'd much rather have that than the mess that was Empire. The units were also a lot more interesting. Maybe this is because the time period is pushed forward a bit, but I just liked it more. It's definitely worth checking out and is a great game, but overall it really didn't contribute too much to the legacy of Total War as a whole, so Napoleon will have to get comfy with his little man syndrome in B tier. Alright, Shogun 2, baby. My sweet little darling for me, Shogun 2 lands in the lower S tier, I'd say. For one, I just adore the time period. You know, who doesn't love feudal Japan with samurais and ninjas? It has some of the game's best feeling battles and campaign mechanics. Everything about Shogun 2 is just so sleek and well thought out and balanced. You know, to this day, CA has yet to put together siege battles that feel as good as Shogun 2's. The AI is probably some of Total War's best. Like in Shogun 2, CA was able to take the core gameplay of what makes a Total War game good and made it near perfect. And it was the first game to actually introduce the character skill tree progression, where you can actually influence what your leaders and agents' strengths are. You know, the only thing you might be able to nitpick at here and why it kind of just barely edges into the S tier for me is that CA really took a step back with the scope. You know, the unit roster does its job, but it's very limited and there are no real faction specific units. And this leaves all factions to feel very similar. And I mean, this all does make sense. It's only feudal Japan, but alas, it hurts the fun just a tiny bit. Like a teeny tiny tad, it kind of hurts the fun, you know? But Shogun 2 still holds up so well to this day, you know, regardless of the replayability issues, because there's nothing just quite as sleek and clean and balanced in Total War's repertoire. And that's why this ninja is sneaking its way into S tier. Alright, now what was originally a DLC for Shogun 2 is now a standalone game, Fall of the Samurai. This one's really tough because Fall of the Samurai is so fucking good, but I have to put it into B tier. It was so good actually that they ripped it out of Shogun 2 and made it a standalone game. Hey there, Troy's editor, Troy here. I should have elaborated a bit more here about the pricing around Fall of the Samurai. I'm upset because the game is still $30. The fact now that Shogun 2 is also $30, but they haven't decreased the price of Fall of the Samurai and just slapped a Saga title on it, that's the part that's upsetting, but a bit overpriced. Anyways, thanks for listening. Back to Troy. Bye. Which just puts a big fat sour taste in my mouth. And it's a damn shame, you know, because like I said, this DLC was and is great. It's so fun to have this mix of sword and bow units with gunpowder line infantry. And it actually takes place in the late 19th century, so it's actually the Total War game that's closest to today. There are even like Gatling guns and naval bombardments and really interesting cool artillery. And Fall of the Samurai even has really cool campaign mechanics where you need to work with the imperial powers of the time who are kind of trying to influence Japan. And this is a really interesting time in Japan's history. But again, CA with its egregious pricing model just had to ruin it. Like, what are you talking about, man? What are you talking about? So yes, because of that, unfortunately, it's sitting in B tier, although the highest of high B tiers, you know, nonetheless, definitely check it out if you got $30 to spare. Okay, so now Rome 2, which at the time was the very highly anticipated follow-up to Rome 1. For me, Rome 2 is sitting at a B tier. It currently fights with Three Kingdoms as the #1 historical title on Steam charts, and it's pretty close. So for being a 10-year-old game at this point, it's really doing quite well. But Rome 2's biggest blemish is that its launch was horrendous, maybe one of the worst in this series.
Alright, they're incoming. Here we go. There they come. Oh my god. Oh no. Just kidding. We wanted to knock down that fence. We're taking off. See you guys later.
It was just buggy and could barely run. I honestly only barely touched it at launch. At the time, I refunded it because it ran so poorly. But I have gone back and played it quite a bit now, and I do enjoy it. It still can't quite hook me like some of the other titles can. Just personally, I'm not the biggest fan of some of its campaign mechanics, like its internal political system and how it manages some of its provinces. The game does nail its settings and the battles are good fun. And I do also appreciate that CA did hold on to naval battles here, even though they aren't really quite up to snuff. Rome 2 was also the first to introduce the army stances. such as March or Ambush, which I think gives it a lot of brownie points. I will say though, a lot of the content that they have added here is locked away behind like 8 DLCs or something like that. You know, with how terrible this launch was, I think they should have given the community a little bit of good grace and done some free LC, but hey, that's whatever. So it's good, but it has its issues. I think Rome 2 is a solid lower B tier right here behind Napoleon. All right, so 2015's Attila Total War. I think this might be a pretty hot take, but for me, Attila is a kind of lower C tier. Personally, I just really can't get into it. And Attila is an interesting one because this came out during a period I wasn't doing PC gaming anymore. I was in college, so I was busy and very, very broke. So I've only really played Attila fairly recently, and yeah, it just can't really hook me. Maybe it's the setting, which is just right before and after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which isn't super thrilling for me. And the graphics I just don't think they look good. Campaign map looks muddy and bland compared to its predecessor, even Rome 2. I also just find the units very boring. Again, the game just seems kind of bland. It definitely did some interesting things with some more depth and emphasis on religion. It also was the first to introduce horde mechanics that you see in a lot of the later titles. So I respect it. It did take a lot of looks mechanically, but ultimately I think its looks and vibe are just a little too bland for me. You know, I have heard and think that Attila is good for a more hardcore audience as it's super challenging and historically deep and accurate. You know, but it just really ain't for me. So for me, Attila is just hanging out in C tier. And alrighty, now into some of the good stuff, baby. Warhammer 2. Yes. Now, like I said, skipping Warhammer 1, because baby, Warhammer 2 just blew that shit out of the water. Instant S tier. Actually, gonna put it above Shogun 2, but below Medieval. Whether you're a historical or a fantasy player, or both, or whatever, you can't deny that Total War and Warhammer go together like peanut butter and jelly, baby. And Warhammer 2 really solidified this pairing. There's just, honestly, I can barely point out anything wrong with it. And this came out at a time I wasn't PC gaming, but was probably the sole reason I got back into it. I saw this and just had to play it. And what it really does is just have faction diversity, not only in units, but in campaign mechanics that just bring in an untold amount of replayability. Not to mention just epic battles with greenskins, orcs, vampires, elves, humans, squirves, dwarves, skaven, and ratmen, just whatever your fantasy is, Warhammer 2 probably has it. Lizardmen. Like, if you even slightly enjoy fantasy and strategy games, this is almost a dream come true. And when Warhammer 2 was eventually paired with its predecessor to form the Mortal Empires campaign, woo-wee! The scope and replayability here are just unmatched. For now. Warhammer 2 was a landmark Total War title, and to me is considered a classic Total War game, so it has to be an S tier. But did these fantasy elements bleed into and ruin some of the future historical titles? That's a discussion for a whole nother video, so for now, let's move on. Alrighty, Three Kingdoms. I wonder if this will surprise anyone, but for me, Three Kingdoms is actually a pretty high A tier. I love Three Kingdoms. It honestly just did so much great. Its provincial management is deep and great. Its empire management is interesting and great. Its character focus and abilities are unique and great. Its diplomacy is some of the best in the series. I'm really puzzled on why CA kind of just abandoned this game. It's doing solid. It still has a decent player base. I'm not sure, but for me, it's currently the best modern historical title. The only thing you can really bag on here is it is pretty limited in scope, and its units themselves can be kind of boring. But it kind of halfway makes up for this by making the characters really deep and interesting and badass. And with its romance mode, which is the better way to play in my opinion, Three Kingdoms does toe the line a bit between fantasy and historical, but that makes sense because it's based on the stories of the Three Kingdoms time period of ancient China. Three Kingdoms just works.
All of this just works. It's not, I'm not.
That was a lie.
And it's great fun, so I'm putting it in A tier, just right above Rome Total War. All right, now, Total War Troy. You'd think because of its fantastic name, I'd give it an instant S tier. But unfortunately, Troy for me is a D tier. Now, really for me, there's only really one redeeming quality of Troy, and that is the expanded resource system. This does add a good layer of depth to empire planning. But really, everything else in Troy is just bleh. The diplomacy and hero units take a step backwards from Three Kingdoms. The units and battles are just plain boring. With being in the Bronze Age, there is very limited technology for your troops to work with. And the whole God favor system is essentially just a bunch of buffs. Troy isn't inherently awful. It's just there's so much better Total War games out there. You shouldn't even waste your time unless you just really, really love the setting and the time period or the Brad Pitt movie. I don't fucking know. Maybe check it out. But again, for me, it's a solid D tier. And so let's go ahead and skip Warhammer 3 for now and skip straight to Pharaoh, the game that nobody asked for. And I don't have a symbol here for Pharaoh, but I'm going to go ahead and use Thrones Britannia. Because basically Pharaoh is just Troy, but shifted south to Egypt and the Levant. But yeah, Total War Pharaoh is also just a D tier for me. Actually, maybe on the line with C, between D and C, because it does definitely have the edge on Troy. Again, the resource system is good, but now they also add an outpost system for further empire building depth. And the end game does have a nice apocalyptic feel with the Sea Peoples, which is interesting. But a lot of the same gripes with Troy still stand. And you also have to take into consideration that Troy is technically a saga title, so it was like $40 or something like that, when Pharaoh is a full-fledged $60 game. And the units are boring, the battles are boring, the sieges are boring, your generals and heroes are boring. You know, I'm not going to rip on it here. I got a full review on it. Go check it out for more details. But yeah, it's sitting at D tier still, because although it did improve on Troy, it's a full-fledged priced title. It should have done something. It didn't do shit. And finally, Total War Warhammer 3, the precipice of the Warhammer trilogy. This is my favorite Total War game in the entire series. Instant number one S tier. And call me a fanboy or a fantasy fanboy, whatever the fuck you want. I just love Total Warhammer 3 and where it's at right now. It continued all the same greatness of Warhammer 2, but just adds more by making it bigger and better. Now I have to say, yes, at launch, the game wasn't perfect. Probably actually would have been around a B or A, but it is coming close to 2 years since it's been released, and CA has been working hard. A lot of its balance and campaign issues that plagued it initially are for the most part addressed, and any issues left really isn't enough to spoil the fun. And with Immortal Empires, CA has truly created a mega game. The amount of variation and replayability here is huge. The map itself is just massive, and there's even areas that they look like they're probably going to expand into. And now, sure, to access Immortal Empires in all its glory will cost you, well, the 3 games are $60 each for $180, and then there's all this DLC. I gotta say at least $300, probably more. But shockingly, I have to say it's worth it. There are thousands of hours of fun to be had here. Now, the recent DLC price increase is a tough pill to swallow, and the recent outrage is justified. But still, what CA has created here is truly awe-inspiring and magical. So I love Warhammer 3, and I'm very excited to see how big this game can get. So yeah, easy number one S tier spot for me. Whew. All right. Are you still with me? That was quite the tier list. In conclusion, yes, my favorite Total War game is Total War Warhammer 3, and Medieval 2 is my favorite historical title. It's probably not quite up to snuff with like Three Kingdoms or Shogun 2, and maybe I wouldn't boot it up quite as much now, but it has brought me the most joy over its lifetime. And yeah, I'm a big fan of the fantasy setting in Warhammer, but I do love a good historical Total War game. And it is a shame that the most recent two have just been kind of shitty. Here they are, sitting down in here in D tier, them shitty little shits. Hey, this is Troy's editor again. Big point I forgot to point out here is that there's no F tiers, at least for me. I do think every game that CA's created has had some sort of merit. There's been no big, complete, total failure, at least the ones I've played. Anyways, just wanted to point that out. Thanks, bye. It is also a bummer that CA has done some pretty shitty business practices throughout its history. You know, we do need to hold them accountable on that and push back, but I know they have some passion in them. They've created some phenomenal video games which dominate the strategy genre. So CA, just know we are hard on you because we love your products, and I want to see what new things you guys can come up with. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So friends, let me know, what is your Total War tier list? Which one's your favorite? Am I just some noob that has no idea what he's saying? I look forward to chatting with y'all down in the comments below, and see you next time. See ya.